Get off this plane right now, you embarrassing old woman. His voice cut through the entire cabin like a sharp knife. Every single person on board froze. The flight attendant near the front galley dropped the glass she was holding. Even Celeste, the mistress, sitting comfortably beside Victor in the wide leather seat, stopped laughing and looked up. The words hung in the air like something dirty. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Victor. Her mother, Rose Sterling, whispered his name the same way she had whispered it the night he was born. Soft, full of love. Please, son, I don't understand. What did I do? Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking in her lap. She was 62 years old, dressed in a simple gray coat with white hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She had worked her entire life so that her son could sit in a plane like this, and now he was looking at her like she was a stranger. "You know exactly what you did," Victor said coldly, not even turning his face toward her properly. "You embarrassed me in front of Celeste. You spoke to her like she was nothing. I will not allow that." Rose blinked slowly. She had simply asked Celeste, politely, to please move her bag from the seat that Rose had been assigned. That was all. She had not raised her voice, she had not said anything rude, but Celeste had smiled in that sharp, dangerous way she always smiled, and now here they were. Celeste uncrossed her long legs and leaned back with a lazy smile. "Victor, darling, I told you, either she behaves herself or she leaves. I refuse to travel with someone who looks down on me." She picked up her champagne glass again and swirled it slowly, watching Rose from the corner of her eye. There was no anger on Celeste's face, just satisfaction, the quiet, cold satisfaction of a woman who knew exactly how much power she had over the man sitting beside her. Victor turned to the two security men standing near the cabin door. "Escort her out," he said. Simple as that, like he was asking them to remove a piece of unwanted luggage. Rose stared at her son. She had carried him in her body for 9 months. She had stayed awake through 1,000 sick nights, holding his small burning forehead in her palm. She had sold her own gold jewelry when his school fees were overdue. She had prayed for him every single morning of her life without fail. And now he was having her removed from his plane. "Victor," her voice was very quiet now. "I am your mother." He did not answer. He did not even flinch. He simply looked toward the window as the two men stepped closer to Rose. One of them put a hand gently but firmly on her arm. "Ma'am, please come with us." Rose stood slowly. Her knees ached. She did not fight. She did not scream. She picked up her small handbag from the seat beside her, straightened her gray coat, and walked toward the exit door with her head held high. Celeste watched her go with that same slow smile and lifted her champagne glass in a small private toast to herself. At the top of the aircraft stairs, Rose paused. She turned and looked back at her son one final time. He still had not looked at her. His eyes were fixed on his phone. "God keep you safe, son," Rose said softly. Her voice did not break. Then she walked down the stairs alone, step by careful step, onto the cold gray tarmac below. The aircraft door closed behind her with a heavy click. The engines began to growl louder. Rose stood on the tarmac and watched her son's private jet slowly pull away. She watched it taxi to the runway. She watched it lift into the pale sky until it became a small silver dot, and then nothing at all. The wind whipped her white hair across her face. The tarmac was cold and vast around her. She stood very still for a long moment, and then at last her legs gave way. She sat down slowly on a low concrete barrier nearby, folded her hands in her lap, and let the tears come. She was not crying because she was broken, she was crying because she remembered. She remembered a small boy, no older than 5, who used to run to the gate every evening when she came home from work. "Mama! Mama is home!" She remembered how he would climb onto her back and demand she carry him to the kitchen. She remembered the day he got into university on a full scholarship and how they had both danced around the tiny living room of their small house, laughing and crying at the same time. She remembered every sacrifice, every prayer, every sleepless night. She remembered it all, and none of it could explain the man she had just watched fly away. A few minutes later, an airport official walked across the tarmac towards her. He was a young man with a kind face, and he looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said gently, "your son's assistant called ahead. You've been asked to leave the terminal premises as well. I'm very sorry." Rose looked up at him. "He called ahead?" she repeated quietly. The young man nodded, looking at his shoes. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I truly am." Rose nodded once and stood up. "All right," she said. "I'll go." She walked through the terminal alone. People were rushing past in every direction, rolling suitcases, talking on phones, laughing with each other. Nobody paid any attention to a white-haired woman in a gray coat, walking slowly toward the exit with a small handbag. Outside, the city spread out in front of her, busy, loud, and completely indifferent. Rose stood on the pavement and tried to think clearly. Her phone was almost dead. She had a small amount of cash. She had no idea where to go. Victor had been her only family. The house she had been staying in for the past few months was Victor's house. She could not go back there. She began to walk. She didn't know where. She just walked. Down one street, then another, passing shops and petrol stations and small restaurants. The cold wind pushed against her. Her knees ached with every step, but she kept moving because stopping felt worse. She passed a small park and almost sat down on a bench, but a light drizzle began to fall from the gray sky, and she kept moving. She had walked perhaps 20 minutes when she stepped off a pavement without looking properly. She heard a sharp screech of brakes. A large black car stopped just half a meter from her. The driver's door immediately opened, and a tall man in his late 40s stepped out. He had a strong, steady face, the kind of face that does not panic easily, but right now he looked very shaken. "Ma'am, are you all right? I nearly—" He stopped. He looked at her properly. Rose was standing there very still in the light rain, her white hair damp, her eyes red from crying. She looked like a woman who had simply run out of places to go. The man looked at her for a moment and then said more gently, "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking." She stepped back onto the pavement and tried to walk on, but her knees, which had been hurting for the past half hour, chose that exact moment to stop cooperating. She grabbed the iron railing beside her just in time. The man moved quickly and caught her arm before she could fall. "Hey, easy now." He held her arm firmly and looked at her face. "You need to sit down, and I think you need a doctor." "I don't need a doctor." But even as she said it, her voice came out thin and tired and unconvincing. "Just sit for a moment," the man said. He opened the back door of his car and helped her in out of the rain. He got back in himself and turned the engine off. Then he turned around in his seat and looked at her. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm not going to drive anywhere without your permission, but I'd like to help if you let me. Are you in trouble?" Rose looked at him. He had calm gray eyes, and he was in no hurry. He was just looking at her, patient and still. "I've had a difficult morning," Rose said carefully. He nodded. "It looks like it. Is there somewhere I can take you? Family? A friend?" Rose looked down at her hands. "No, not just now." Daniel Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I buy you a cup of tea? There's a cafe just around the corner."
Nothing more than that, just tea. And if you want to talk, I'll listen. And if you don't want to talk, that's fine too. Rose looked at him again for a longer moment. In 62 years of life, she had become quite good at reading people. This man was not pretending. "All right," she said at last. "Thank you. Tea would be very nice." They sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe with steamed-up windows. A pot of tea arrived. Rose wrapped both hands around her cup and looked down at the table. Daniel Hayes sat across from her and said nothing, just as he had promised. After a while, Rose began to speak, slowly at first, choosing her words carefully. She told him about Victor. Not all of it, not yet, just the facts. That her son had asked her to leave his plane this morning, that she had nowhere to go as a result, that she had been walking since then. She kept her voice steady. She was not looking for sympathy. She was simply telling the truth to the one person who had asked. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been in this city?" 3 months, Rose said. "I came from Hillmarsh. That's where I've always lived. Victor asked me to come. He said he wanted me close." She paused. "I sold my house in Hillmarsh to come." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, his expression had not changed, but something behind it had shifted. "And this morning was not the first time he's treated you this way," he said. It was not a question. Rose looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "It was the worst time, but not the first." "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "You shouldn't have to live like that. Nobody should." Rose straightened slightly. "I didn't come here for pity," she said, not unkindly. "I know," Daniel said. "I can see that." He picked up his own cup. "Do you have any money at all? Enough for a hotel for tonight, at least?" Rose opened her purse and looked inside. She had enough for perhaps 2 nights in a very cheap place. She told him so. He nodded slowly. "All right. Here's what I'd like to suggest, and please tell me if I've overstepped." He leaned forward slightly. "I own a building about 10 minutes from here. There were 2 fully furnished guest apartments on the 3rd floor. They are both empty right now. You're welcome to stay in one of them, no charge, no conditions, while you figure out your next step. It's safe, it's quiet, and you'd have complete privacy." Rose looked at him carefully. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I don't know you." "That's true," he agreed, "and I understand if you say no. I'm a stranger, and that's a reasonable thing to think about. But I nearly ran you over 20 minutes ago in the rain, and your son put you out of a plane this morning, and I think you've had quite enough difficulty for one day." He said it without drama, just calmly, as a fact. Rose looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" Daniel thought about that. "Because my own mother died 7 years ago, and there is not a single day I wouldn't give everything I own to have her back. And because no mother on earth should have to sit in the rain on a pavement because her child threw her away." His voice was completely steady when he said it, but his eyes were not.
Rose was quiet for a very long time. The cafe hummed gently around them. Rain tapped on the window. Finally, she said, "All right, Mr. Hayes. Thank you. I'll accept your offer, but only until I sort myself out. I won't impose any longer than I must." "You're not imposing," he said simply. "You're a guest." He stood and picked up his coat. "And please, call me Daniel." The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a well-kept stone building on a quiet street lined with trees. It was simple but warm. Pale walls, a comfortable sofa the color of oatmeal, a small kitchen with everything needed, and a bedroom with a wide window that looked out over the treetops. There was a small vase of yellow flowers on the dining table. Rose stood in the center of the living room and looked around slowly.
She had not had a space that felt peaceful in a very long time. Daniel showed her where everything was: the extra blankets, the tea and coffee in the cupboard, the number for the building manager downstairs. Then he said, "Rest. You look exhausted. I'll check on you tomorrow, if that's all right." "That's very kind," Rose said. "Daniel?" He stopped at the door. "Thank you," she said, genuinely. He nodded once. "Good night, Mrs. Sterling." He left. Rose stood by the window for a while after he had gone, watching the wet street below, the city lights reflected in the puddles. She thought about Victor. She thought about the small boy who used to run to the gate every evening. Then she went to the kitchen, made herself a proper cup of tea, sat down at the table, and began, slowly and carefully, to think about what came next. She slept better that night than she had expected to. When she woke the next morning, the room was full of soft light and the sound of birds from the trees outside. She made tea and sat on the small balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and breathed in the quiet morning air. She felt sore and tired, but something else too. Something underneath the tiredness that she hadn't felt in months. She thought about it for a while before she recognized it. It was the feeling of not being afraid. She hadn't realized until this moment how long she had been afraid in Victor's house, walking carefully, speaking carefully, trying not to take up too much space, trying not to give Celeste a reason to complain. There was a knock at the door just before 9. It was Daniel, holding a bag from a bakery nearby. "I hope I'm not too early. I brought bread and some fruit. There's coffee in the bag too if you want it." Rose opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "I was just sitting outside." They sat on the small balcony together with tea and fresh bread. The morning was cool and clear after the rain. Daniel asked how she had slept. She told him honestly. Better than expected. He looked pleased. They were quiet for a bit. Then Rose said, "I've been thinking about what I'm going to do." Daniel nodded and waited. "I can't go back to Hillmarsh. I sold my house there. And I won't go back to Victor's. That chapter is finished," she said it firmly, without drama. "I need to find work. I'm not too old for that, whatever anyone might think. I was a bookkeeper for 30 years. I still know what I'm doing." Daniel looked at her with something like respect. "I don't doubt that for a moment." "Actually," he paused, "I'd like to say something, and I want you to feel completely free to say no." Rose looked at him. "Go ahead." "My company, Hayes Infrastructure, has been looking for a senior accounts manager for 2 months now. The woman who held the post retired, and we haven't found the right person yet. It's a proper position, full salary, full benefits. I'm not offering it out of charity. I'm offering it because you just described exactly the kind of experience we need, and I trust my instincts about people." He said this very directly, looking at her without flinching. "But if it feels uncomfortable, I completely understand." Rose was quiet. She looked over the treetops. Then she said, "You'd need to see my records, my work history, references." "Of course," Daniel said, "whenever you're ready." "I'll have them ready by this afternoon, and I want a proper interview. I don't want any special treatment." "I wouldn't offer it. That's not how I run things." Rose looked at him then, and almost smiled. "All right," she said. "We'll do it properly."
She had her references and work history organized and sent to Daniel's office by 2 o'clock that afternoon. The interview was the following morning, formal, in a proper meeting room, with Daniel and his operations manager both present. Rose answered every question clearly and precisely. She knew her numbers. She knew the systems. She had been doing this work since before the operations manager was born, and it showed. When it was over, Daniel walked her to the lobby. "We'll be in touch within 24 hours, he said professionally. Rose nodded and thanked him and went home. 22 hours later, his assistant called to offer her the position. She started the following Monday. The office was busy and modern, with large windows and good coffee and people who said good morning and meant it.
A few people looked at her curiously at first. She was older than most of the team, and they had all heard that Daniel Hayes had personally recommended her. But Rose simply sat at her desk, put her head down, and got to work. By the end of the first week, 2 of her younger colleagues had quietly come to her desk to ask her for advice on things they had been struggling with for months. She helped them both without making them feel small for asking. Daniel stopped by her desk on Friday afternoon. "How's the first week?" he asked. "Manageable. Your filing system for the Northern accounts is a disaster, by the way. I've started rebuilding it." He laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh. "I've been telling them that for 2 years. I know. I found your memo about it from 2022. He shook his head and smiled. "Well, glad someone's finally doing something about it." He turned to go, then turned back. "Are you all right, Rose? Really?" She looked up from her screen. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. "That's enough for now." And it was. Over the weeks that followed, Rose found her footing again. She worked steadily and well. She cooked for herself in the little apartment kitchen and rediscovered that she actually enjoyed it when nobody was making her feel like a nuisance for being in the room. She found a small library 2 streets away and started going on Saturday mornings. She walked in the park in the evenings when the weather allowed. The ache of what Victor had done was still there. It probably always would be, but it no longer knocked the breath out of her every time she thought of it. She was building something new, quietly, without drama, one careful day at a time. Daniel came by the apartment sometimes in the evenings, not often, and always briefly. He would bring something from a bakery or a small bunch of flowers from the market, and they would sit on the balcony and talk. He told her about his company, about the projects he was working on, about the places he had been. She told him about Hillmarsh, about the small house with the yellow front door that she had loved, about the garden she had kept, about the neighbors who had been her friends for 30 years. He listened to everything she said with genuine attention, the way people rarely listen anymore. One evening, she asked him about his own family. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My parents are both gone now. My father when I was in my 30s, my mother 7 years ago. I have one older brother. We don't speak much. He and I had different ideas about how to live." He paused. "I never married. I was always working. And then one day I looked up and a long time had passed." He said it without self-pity, just as a fact. Rose looked at him. "You're a good man, Daniel. I hope you know that." He looked at her for a moment, then looked away at the lights of the city. "I try to be," he said quietly. One Saturday morning, about 6 weeks after Rose had moved into the apartment, she was in the small library reading when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Victor. She stared at his name for a long moment. The phone rang 4 more times. Then it stopped. She put it face down on the table and went back to her book. But her hands were not entirely steady. When she got home that afternoon, she found a voicemail. She sat on the sofa and listened to it with her coat still on. Victor's voice was different from how she remembered it. Flat, strained. He said, "Mother, I need to speak with you. I'm in the city. Please call me back." That was all. She did not call back that day. She went for a walk instead, a long one, through the park and around the lake and back through the market streets. She thought about what she wanted to say to him, or whether she wanted to say anything at all. By the time she got home, it was dark, and she made soup and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, and still hadn't decided. The next morning, she called him. He answered on the first ring. "Mother," he said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. "Thank you for calling." "What do you want, Victor?" she asked. Her voice was calm and even. There was a pause. "Can we meet?" he asked. "I'd like to explain."
They met in a coffee shop near the park, Rose's choice. Victor arrived before her and stood up when she walked in. She barely recognized him at first. He had always been impeccably dressed, expensive suits, polished shoes, that easy confidence that a great deal of money can give a person. The man standing before her now was wearing a creased jacket. His face was thin. There were dark shadows under his eyes. He looked as though the past 6 weeks had aged him considerably. "Mother," he said.
She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. "Sit down, Victor," she said. He sat. He told her everything. It came out in pieces, not smoothly, not with excuses, just in pieces. Celeste had gone. About 3 weeks after the plane incident, she had started talking about investment opportunities, private funds, exclusive deals, guaranteed returns. She had been very convincing. Victor had transferred large sums to an account she controlled. Then she had stopped answering her phone. Her apartment was empty. Her social accounts were gone. Her name, he had since learned from a detective he had hired, was almost certainly not Celeste Vane, the name she had given him. She was part of a network, professional, well-organized. He was not the first. He would likely not be the last. Rose listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, the coffee shop hummed quietly around them. She looked at her son, this man whom she had once held in her arms in a hospital room and could not believe was real. He was so small and perfect. She looked at him for a long time. "How much did she take?" Rose asked. Victor told her. It was a great deal. "And the house?" "The main house in Gravenport is mortgaged beyond its value. The bank has given me 90 days. "And your shares in Shentz?" He looked down. "Sold. Most of them. To fund the investments." Rose was quiet for a moment. "Victor," she said at last, "I am not going to tell you this doesn't hurt. It does. What you did on that plane hurt me more than anything has hurt me in a very long time. You sold your own mother off like a piece of furniture because a woman told you to." Victor flinched. He did not look up. "I know, Mother," he said. "I raised you alone," Rose continued, her voice steady. "After your father left, I raised you entirely on my own. I worked 2 jobs some years. I went without things so you wouldn't have to. I prayed for you every single day of my life, and you looked at me on that plane, and you chose her." The words hung in the air. Victor's jaw was tight. His eyes were very bright. "I know, Mother," he said. His voice was barely a sound. "There is no excuse. I know." Rose looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she said, "Are you eating properly?" He looked up, surprised. "What?" "You look thin," Rose said. "Are you eating?" Something in Victor's face broke completely at that. A sound came out of him that was not quite a word. He put his hand over his eyes. His shoulders shook. And Rose, because she was his mother and she always had been, reached across the table and covered his other hand with hers. She did not say it was all right. She did not forgive him, not yet. She simply held his hand while he wept, because that is what mothers do. She did not take him back easily. She was very clear about that. She would speak to him, she would see him occasionally, but she had her own life now. Her apartment, her job, her Saturday mornings at the library, her evening walks, her colleague who came to her with questions, her employer who brought bread on Sunday mornings. She would not give any of that up, and she would not go back to walking on eggshells. Victor agreed to everything she said. He agreed quietly, without bargaining, without the arrogance that had always edged his voice before. Whatever Celeste had taken from him, along with the money and the property, she had taken that too. Rose was not sure yet whether what remained was better or worse, but at least it was honest. Victor came to the city twice more over the following months. Rose met him for lunch both times, a proper lunch at a proper table, during which they talked about things they had not talked about in years. He told her about his childhood memories, about the things that had scared him, about the pressures he had felt growing up without a father. She told him things too, about the years that had been hard, about the fears she had carried quietly, about the pride she had felt watching him succeed. They talked the way people talk when they have very nearly lost each other entirely, and both knew it. The third time he came to the city, he brought flowers. He stood at the door of her apartment with a bunch of yellow flowers, the same color as the ones Daniel had put on the table the day she arrived, and he said, "These are for you, not because I need anything from you, just because." Rose took the flowers and looked at them for a moment. Then she looked at her son. "Come in," she said. I'll put the kettle on." Meanwhile, across the city, in a very different part of it, Daniel Hayes had been having a quiet but significant few months of his own. He had always been a practical man, someone who trusted action over feeling, who solved problems methodically and kept his own counsel. He had lived alone for a long time and had told himself, when he thought about it at all, that he preferred it that way. It was simpler, easier, no complications, no attachments, no one to worry about. But something had shifted, quietly and without permission, sometime in the past weeks. He found himself looking forward to the evenings on the balcony in a way he had not looked forward to anything in years. He found himself stopping at the bakery on Saturday mornings without being entirely sure why, given that he was not especially hungry. He found himself in the middle of long, complicated meetings, thinking about something Rose had said, some dry, precise, quietly funny observation, and having to stop himself from smiling at the wrong moment. He was not a man who moved quickly or said things without meaning them. But one evening in late spring, sitting on the balcony with the warm air coming in from the park and the last light going gold across the rooftops, he put down his cup and said, "Rose, I'd like to ask you something." She looked at him over her own cup. "Go ahead." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words in that careful way he had. "I've spent a great deal of my life being very practical," he said. "I built a company. I managed things. I kept everything running efficiently. I told myself that was enough, and for a long time I believe I even meant it." He paused. "But somewhere in the last few months, I've started to think that I was wrong about that I was missing something rather important." Rose was very still. The city hummed below them. "What I'm trying to say," Daniel said, "is that I would very much like to spend more time with you, not as a landlord, not as an employer, something else, something," he paused again, "more than that, if you would want that too." Rose looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She thought about the tarmac. She thought about the rain. She thought about the cafe and the bread and the library and the yellow flowers and the evenings on this balcony. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not performed for, not tolerated, but actually seen by another person. She put down her own cup. "Daniel," she said, "I am 62 years old. I have been through a great deal this year. I don't have the patience anymore for things that aren't honest or for people who aren't what they appear to be." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be patient with anything unclear. I'm telling you honestly what I feel, and I'm asking honestly what you think." Rose was quiet. Then the corner of her mouth moved slightly. "I think," she said, "that you are the most sensible man I have met in a very long time." "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That," Rose said, "is a beginning." The months that followed were the quietest and the best that either of them could remember. They did ordinary things together. They walked in the park on Sunday mornings. They cooked dinner in the little apartment kitchen, badly at first, and then better, and then with a kind of easy confidence that comes from doing something together often enough. They went to exhibitions and bookshops, and once to a small jazz concert in a garden courtyard, where Daniel admitted freely that he knew nothing about jazz, but enjoyed watching Rose close her eyes and listen. She laughed at that. He told her she had a wonderful laugh. She told him not to be sentimental, but she was smiling when she said it. At work, Rose had by this point completely reorganized the Northern accounts, developed a new quarterly reporting system that saved the finance team roughly 8 hours of work per cycle, and taken on 2 junior members of staff who she was quietly but thoroughly training to be twice as capable as they had been before she arrived. The rest of the company had long since stopped wondering why Daniel Hayes had personally hired the quiet woman with white hair. They simply trusted her, and that, Rose thought, was exactly as it should be. Victor came to the apartment one afternoon in autumn and met Daniel for the first time. The meeting was quiet and slightly formal. Victor shook Daniel's hand and was polite and said little. Daniel was equally courteous. Rose sat between them, drinking tea, and watched them both, and said almost nothing at all. After Victor had gone, Daniel said, "He seems like a man in the middle of working something out." "Yes," Rose said, "he is." She paused. "He's also still my son." Daniel nodded. "I know," he said. "That doesn't change." Victor lost the house in Gravenport when the bank's deadline arrived. He moved into a small flat in a modest part of the city. He sold most of what remained to clear as much of the debt as he could. He was no longer a trillionaire's son in any practical sense. The vast fortune that had defined him for most of his adult life was reduced to something ordinary. He started working again, properly, from the bottom of things in a consultancy that did not know his name and did not care about his family history. It was hard and humbling, and several times he nearly quit. He did not quit. He called Rose sometimes in the evenings. The calls were short at first and then longer. He did not ask her for money. He did not ask her for anything except to listen. And she did. There were things that would never entirely heal. Rose knew that. Some mornings she still woke early and lay in the quiet and thought about that tarmac, the cold gray of it, the sound of the engines, the way that Victor had not looked at her when she said goodbye. She thought about the house in Hillmarsh with its yellow front door, which belonged to someone else now and always would. She thought about the woman she had been before all of this, careful, diminished, walking on eggshells, and she was grateful, fiercely and quietly grateful, that she was not that woman anymore. She was something else now. She was Rose Sterling, who came to work before anyone else and left after most had gone. She was the woman in the third-floor apartment with the balcony overlooking the trees. She was the person her younger colleagues came to when they needed to think clearly about a problem. She was the woman who walked in the park on Sunday mornings beside a tall, quiet, practical man who stopped at the bakery on the way home and didn't always know why, but did it anyway. One Sunday morning in November, walking through the park with the leaves falling gold and orange all around them, Daniel stopped beside the lake and looked out at the water. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out a small, plain box. He opened it without ceremony. Inside was a simple ring, a single stone, elegant and not flashy. He said, "I'm not going to make a speech. You know what I think, and I know what I feel, and I believe you feel the same, so I'm just asking, will you marry me, Rose?" Rose looked at the ring. She looked at the lake. She looked at Daniel Hayes, who was watching her with calm gray eyes and no performance and no pretense. She thought about it all, every single thing, from the beginning to right now. Then she took the ring from the box and held it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Yes," she said, "I will." He put the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. She did not know how he had managed that. She did not ask. They stood for a while longer by the lake, watching the leaves fall. Then they walked home through the autumn morning, side by side, for the first time not as something cautious and beginning, but as something certain and arrived. The wedding was small, 50 people, maybe 60, in the courtyard of a quiet hotel on a bright December afternoon. Rose wore a deep blue dress the color of winter sky. Victor was there. He sat in the third row and did not make a speech because Rose had not asked him to, but he was there. Afterward, when the dinner tables were being cleared and the last guests were saying goodnight, Victor found Rose standing alone for a moment by the courtyard wall. He came and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then he said, "You look happy, Mother." She looked at him. "I am," she said simply. He nodded. His jaw worked slightly. "You deserve it. I know I was—" "Victor," she said quietly. "Not tonight." He stopped. "Tonight," she said, "just say goodnight." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned down and kissed her cheek, gently, carefully, the way he had as a small boy.
"Good night, Mother," he said. "Good night, Victor," she said, and he walked back toward the light. Later, much later, after everyone had gone and the courtyard was quiet, Rose and Daniel stood together by the window of their room. The city lay spread out below them, lit and alive. Rose leaned against Daniel's shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they stood like that for a while without speaking, which was one of the things they did best. Finally, Rose said, "I've been thinking." Daniel made a low sound that meant he was listening. "About what?" "About what she said in the park, that you'd been missing something important for a long time." "Yes," he said. "What were you thinking about it?" "I was thinking," Rose said, "that I was too, for a long time. I just didn't know what it was called." Daniel looked at her. "And now?" Rose smiled. The real one, the one she did not give to everyone. "Now," she said, "I know." He pressed his lips to her hair. Outside, the city hummed and glittered in the dark, and inside the room, everything was still and warm and right. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're watching, wherever you are in the world, leave a comment and let us know, because sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones that start on a cold gray tarmac with a woman in her small handbag and nothing left at all, except herself.